Good evening, everybody. My name is Dawn Nundu. I'm the Audience and Engagement Editor at Food from Mzansi, and welcome to Gather to Grow. This is a brand new space that we created on Twitter Spaces, and previously we worked with the awesome Guguletu Mahlangu on Farm Spaces every Monday, and we created a new space on a Wednesday called Gather to Grow. We're hoping to use this platform to engage with farmers, with people in the agricultural sector, with people in health and other sectors, all part of the Food for Mzansi brand and what we aim to do in the sector. So without any further ado, I'll now introduce our host for this evening. It's Guguletu Mahlangu. Gugu, over to you, and we'll introduce our speakers for tonight. And then just for everyone's update, we will be talking about crop damage and livestock theft today. So if you have any questions, keep them there, write them down. You can even DM myself on Food for Mzansi's account or Guguletu, and we'll answer your questions separately as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Google.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited and a bit nervous to host the first Gather to Grow on Food from Mzansi. Tonight's definitely going to be an amazing session. I think we can just start with introductions so that everyone can get acquainted and we know who's who in agriculture. So I see Andile Ngcobo is here. Hi, Andile.
Hi, Google, how are you? No, Andile Ngcobo from KZN, Pietermaritzburg. Farming mostly with vegetable crops, but then I also do a lot of consultation surrounding extensive agriculture, intensive agriculture, livestock, small stock, and just the basic business planning and production planning of farming enterprises.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andile, for that. Dr. Kekana is here. Dr. Kekana, just kindly introduce yourself and just tell us what you do.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Raesibe Kekana. I'm a technical vet at MSD Animal Health. I'm part of the ruminants technical team. So basically what we do is we provide technical support to the farmers and everybody that's interested in knowing about our drugs and medications and all that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. We also have Dr. Jane is here. Hi, Dr. Jane. Kindly introduce yourself.
I'm Jane Boyce. I'm a safety security risk analyst of Free State Agriculture, representing mostly the commercial farmers in the Free State. I'm also actually better known as a crime analyst.
Interesting. Thank you so much for joining. Last but not least, we have the chairperson of Red Meat Producers Organization, Mrs. Isobel Kruger.
I'm Isobel Kruger. I am the chairperson of the Stock Theft Forum in the Free State. Not the chairperson of the RPO, but of the RPO Stock Theft Forum. We've got the whole Free State, and together with Jane Boyce, we've got a lot to do.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much for the introductions. I think we should just dive straight to our topic for tonight because I think it really relates to a lot of our farmers here on the show. Andile, I will start with you. As a farmer, just tell us what are the common crop damages that one can experience and livestock theft?
I think it'll obviously be easier for me to subsequently start with the latest issue we've been having, which is obviously surrounded by crop damage through hail, and obviously that being a natural disaster is something that you can't really foresee or plan around. In fact, it becomes an issue of trying to find not necessarily mitigation strategies, but more so trying to find solutions to issues that arise once you've been hit with hail, whether it's on maize production, vegetable production, because chances of crops recovering are close to none. And obviously in the past, it just makes sense to just plow back everything into the field and replant and start again. But we also know that it's often not a very cheap and affordable exercise to do that. And quite frankly, a lot of businesses have been crippled. A lot of farming businesses have been crippled simply because there hasn't been a solution to issues surrounding hail damage. That's from obviously natural disasters. Not often, rarely find issues from pest manifestation, like locusts, for example, in maize, soya, and grains or extensive agriculture. Not a common thing to happen in South Africa, but there are instances where you find that disease may set in. And another one that was quite a surprise to a lot of farmers in the vegetable farming space was when you find issues of like club rooting on seedlings, but that's something you don't realize may have started at the nursery. So you always look at it as an individual issue that you're facing on your farm because you're often isolated when it comes to your farming business. And you really talk about your issues until you have the conversation 2-3 months down the line and you realize that it's highly unlikely that 5 farmers who have been farming for the last 5 years could suffer from the same negligence or oversight. So clearly the issue must then arise from a source that we all have in common, which is often usually the same nursery or, the same place where we buy our seedlings. Club rooting is also another issue that does affect crop and does damage crop. And then your common issues like a lack of adequate water supply for irrigation and just the change in our climate in general. Climate change has been a very big issue. We've been experiencing frost later into the winter months, whereas we're used to having September being spring. The 1st of September seems to be spring to everyone, but quite frankly, that's not how it really works. Sometimes spring only sits in the 15th of September, maybe even towards the 30th. But this year, we experienced snow in the middle of what we would have called spring. So that's also an unforeseen situation that was crop damage. And like I say, the biggest issue with that is that there's not many preventative measures that you can put in place to avoid something like that. Because again, like I mentioned, it is natural. But there's obviously got to be solutions to issues like that may arise, because the damage on most crops sometimes, because it's natural, isn't necessarily poisonous or deadly in a sense. It just takes away from the quality that everybody is looking for off of the shelf. So obviously no one wants to buy cabbages with holes in them, or the holes are caused literally just by ice or water, basically. The crop itself will not look appealing, and that's the main issue behind why it is then not consumed. So, looking at issues that were going to assist in ensuring that maybe we're able to still market crops that are damaged through processing plants, for example, would make a greater difference to actually recovering at least something, or at the cost that you spent on output, not necessarily making a profit at all, because at least if you make back finance that you have invested in making sure that the crop is there, then you at least have something to use to restart and get a head start on the following season. Right now, I'm just supposed to highlight and mention issues that deal with crop damage, so I'm not sure if I should continue with the solutions.
Thank you so much, Andile. You've really set the scene in terms of starting the discussion around crop damage. And I know that we were also expecting to get Ludwe Kamata, he's a community gardener here from Kailicha, also on the space, but hopefully we can still connect with him later on. If you'd allow me, I'd maybe like to move over to livestock theft and bring Isobel into the conversation, Gugu. Isobel is the chairperson of the RMPO's Stock Theft Forum. And Isobel, we spoke earlier and you specifically mentioned the Stock Theft Act 52 of 1959. What is this act and why should farmers know about it?
Yes, it's Act 57 of 95. It is the Stock Theft Act. If you are a farmer, you have to comply with all the rules. Also, if you want to sell something, you have to apply with the biosecurity rules that are in place now for selling at an auction. If I can explain, according to the Stock Theft Act, there is different sections. And at this stage, the Section 6 and the Section 8 document is of the utmost importance. If you travel, it would be Section 8, and if you want to sell or buy, then you need the Section 6 document. And if I can explain to you what the Section 6 is for the farmers, in short, if you selling cattle or sheep or goats or pigs to anyone, you have to give them a Section 6 subsection 1 document. That is the transfer of ownership. I think you have listened to the news and saw that the SAPD, they visited now the auction houses and they stop the vehicles and they have to go to court or they get high fines for not complying to this act. So if you sell something to another person, you have to give him a Section 6 document. If you are selling at an auction, you have to fill in that Section 6 document and hand it to the auctioneers. There is different questions asked on that, but it's of the utmost importance that it is filled in correctly. So it asks for your full names. So you can't just put your name Isobel Kruger. You have to put in your full names, Anna Isabella Kruger. Then it's your ID number, then your address, and then the detail of the cattle. Now, the cattle, according to the Identification Act, you have to mark your cattle. Or if it's small stock, it should be a tattoo. Or if it's a cattle, then it should have a brand mark, and that brand mark should be registered. Otherwise, you could be fined. So the Section 8 document is the removal of the stock. If you're the owner of that cattle and it is your vehicle that you transported in, you don't need the Section 8 document. But if you use of a transport agency, for instance, XXX, you need to fill in that document and give him a Section 8 document. Or if you use your farm manager to transport the cattle, then you need to give him a Section 8 document.
Wow, thank you so much, Isobel. Interesting stuff to know. And we'll get back to you in terms of where we can actually get these documents and what happens when we don't have them. But we will move on to Dr. Kekana. Hi, Dr. Kekana. How are you?
Hi, Google. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Dr. Kekana. Please just shed some light about livestock. Let's talk about protecting animals against, Andile mentioned, natural disasters. You know, with natural disasters, there's nothing much we can do when it comes to our crops. They are laying there in the fields. But what can we do to protect our animals?
The first important thing when it comes to livestock and protecting them from any kind of dangers or damage would be having a proper structure to house them in. Sort of a place where they can be protected from rain or hail or that sort of thing. Especially for small stock. The big guys, the big cows can normally handle it, and the calves But for lambs and kids, they're born with minimal to zero fat reserves. So they can't warm themselves up if they get cold. So it's important that you build a nice structure for your ewes and your does to keep the babies warm in case of heavy rains or a snowstorm or something like that. And just one important thing, before you start heating up the lambs, let's say you found them extremely cold, you make a fire for them, you need to give them an energy source because their bodies need the energy to recover from the shivering, that sort of thing. So if you just immediately put them in front of a fire and heat them up, some of them might not make it because they don't have the energy and the glucose to metabolize, to regain all that muscle energy and activity again. So it's recommended that you make a mixer of glucose powder and give it them via the mouth, or if your vet is close by, you can give them drips. Choose your valuable ones because in a case of a disaster, you do a triage and you choose which ones you want to save first, and those would be the ones that would get your drip. And for the opposite thing, let's say from heat stress, people that are in intensive livestock production, your chickens, your pigs, and I saw somebody as well with some rabbits that died from heat stress. For those kind of animals, you want to make sure that your housing has enough airflow and that sort of thing. So you make sure that there's enough airflow for them. If it needs to be, I've seen poultry farmers that buy fans and air conditioning for their chicks. I mean, imagine if you're farming in, let's say, Vukani all the way up there in the Kruger. Easy, normal day, 10 o'clock, it's 40 degrees Celsius. So just think about your poor animals and what they're going through. So in case of heat stress, just make sure there's enough adequate cold-ish water and there's a shade for them to stand in so they can protect themselves. Luckily, most of the animals that are in hot areas have adapted to it, so they can most likely survive on their own. And then in case of, let's say, a fire, for instance, there's a fire that's going on, so your normal fire breaks, or those sort of things have failed. So now what do you do with all the animals that manage to survive from the beds and those sort of things? So obviously the first thing, they're in a lot of pain. So you want to make sure that you get some anti-inflammatory in them, so the pain goes down a little bit. They're going to need a lot of fluids in their bodies to sort of hydrate and do that sort of things. So there's a lot of products in the market that you can add to sort of help with the inflammation and, some ointments as well. One of such products, I would say Immunovite. So Immunovite would give you your basic electrolytes, or would give you selenium. Selenium is a very powerful antioxidant, so that will go a long way in repairing the tissues that were damaged. And you also get fulvic acid as well in the Immunovite. So the fulvic acid will also have an anti-inflammatory effect, and it also contributes to wound healing. That's how far, that's as good as I think farmers can protect their livestock.
Wow, thanks so much, Dr. Kekana. We really have a lot of experts here tonight to cover the topics that we're going to be talking about. Maybe we can bring Dr. Jane Bass into the conversation. Dr. Jane, you're with the Free State Agriculture and you're a security risk analyst. And so maybe you can just highlight some of the issues that you deal with on a daily basis. And also maybe pulling into what Dr. Kekana was saying in terms of protecting your animals, besides the risk of climate change and natural disasters, what are some of the other issues that farmers deal with specifically in the Free State?
Firstly, I need to stress that it's very much important for any farmer who is a livestock producer that he needs to protect also his livestock from theft. So I think what is very much important is that you need to introduce safety and security measures at your farm where you're also farming. Maybe make sure that your fences are in place and that they're inspected regularly, because the first thing that goes hand in hand with livestock theft is the cutting of fences, especially where big amounts of livestock get stolen. There are also the issue about brand marking, the keeping of a livestock register. That is very much important. If you or the SAPS arrest the suspects in a livestock theft incident, to prove in court ownership and also to provide that information to the court as to how many livestock animals you have on your farm. This is crucial. But then there are also other preventative measures that can be instituted by farmers. The first thing is that if you have the financial means to introduce some technological measures like camera systems, also collars that some of the commercial farmers have on their cattle and on their sheep. Well, it goes hand in hand that there should be good signal from the cell phone companies in that area. We have lots of problems near the Lesotho border where the signal of the cell phones are not very good. So that is then an issue that you actually don't. And also the electric fences. Some farmers have electric fences, but it's not a guarantee that you are prohibited from any livestock theft. Then some of the other issues that we've picked up is that if you have a livestock theft, even if it's potslag of 1 or 2 sheep or cattle, you need to report it to the SAPS. It's very much important that there should be 100% record of livestock theft, because it's difficult to determine the impact and the extent of livestock theft if those incidents are not reported. And we are sitting in the Free State with almost 70% non-reporting of livestock theft. Then you have lots of problems in trying to convince the SAPs that it's a big issue in a specific area. Also, when you look at livestock theft, it's an organized crime business that's run by syndicates and groups of suspects that are involved. There's a market for them. There's definitely a pool of places. There is definitely a hierarchy. There is also lots of different types of criminals or people that they use, like runners, and then they have transporters who come and pick up the livestock. So it's a very lucrative business for some of the organized syndicates and groups in the Free State. So that's why it's really crucial. When there is any livestock theft incident, you report it to the STAPs so that they are also able to conduct a crime pattern analysis. And that's why the farmers get involved in the white and blue light patrols with the STAPs, where they try on the crime pattern analysis to do patrols and crime prevention operations at the hotspot areas, the high crime areas, and also which day of the week things happen so that they can institute BCP operations, roadblocks, etc. The other thing that I really need just to stress is that if you appoint any person to look after your livestock, even if it's a shepherd, that you conduct a criminal record check on that person, because we have found in numerous cases in the Free State that those persons are and they can become involved in livestock theft. So the person you trust the most with your livestock is actually one that is also dealing in those things. There should be integration and coordination of all this information in order to successfully combat livestock theft.
Thank you so much for that vital information, Dr. Bass. You've given us a lot to think about. And my first thought was it's probably really expensive. Google, thinking about fencing, having all the technology available for you to monitor must be really expensive. Google, we have Andile here as a farmer, but do you think that's definitely true for most farmers?
I was just thinking the same thing, Dawn, as Dr. Jane was speaking. Andile, when it comes to protecting our crops, you mentioned ways to mitigate that. And please just maybe expand more on how we can protect our crops, because it sounds like an expense, right? We're already farming, that's expensive on its own. Now we need to put in all these security measures in place.
Isobel, when we started the show, you spoke about the Stock Theft Act and you spoke about Section 6 and Section 8. Maybe you can talk about some of the documentation that farmers need to be aware of to fill in to be able to keep record, and specifically around marking your livestock. Maybe you can take us through that process.
As Jane mentioned, the Animal Identification Act of 2002 mentioned that you have to either tattoo the small stock, that would be the pigs and the sheep and the goats, and then the cattle should be marked. Now you have to register for that registered brand mark, and that's the only one that are allowed in court, unless you are a stud breeder. Then you have a different kind of a mark that the Simmentala or the Bonsmara will give to you. Then that is also allowed according to the law. Now, at the end, we can give my email address and we can help anyone that doesn't have a brand mark yet that is registered. If you have small stock, you have to, according to the law, tattoo them by 1 month. And then if you have cattle, you can tattoo them by 1 month. By 6 months, you have to. They say it's about 18 months, then you have to brand mark if it's commercial cattle. So now with the new biosecurity rules as well, at auctions, you are not allowed to sell cattle if it's not marked. What happens is we have with the stock theft is that the most cattle that are stolen are the cattle that are just before you brand mark them at 6 months. Those are the prime cattle that are stolen, and then these guys brand mark those cattle with their brand mark, and you don't have any significant to say that, but this is my cattle, it belongs to me, because you don't have a tattoo mark in the ear that you can refer back to. You have to a brand mark registered. That's the only one. You can put that tags in the ear, but that will not stand in court because anyone can put that in. It did happen that you can get your cattle back after they did some investigation, but then you will be, according to the Identification Act, then you will be fined. Now, the fines, the Section 6 is the transfer of ownership. If you don't have that document or you don't give that to someone that bought cattle from you, up to 10 animals, you would be 5,000 rand fine, and 11 or more, then you will go to court. Just keep in mind that we have worked in the beginning of this year of the legislation and the fines that are going to change. And these are getting fines up from 3 years up to 10 years. So that can change. If you give a false statement, also go to court, or you can get the 5,000 rand fine on the Section 6. That's the transfer of ownership. On the Section 8, that's the removal certificate that you have to give someone. Please keep in mind, we find with a lot of cases that they send us the documents and we have to quickly look at and see that the current owner, he's normally writing those Section 8 documents, then give it to the guy that bought the cattle. That is totally incorrect. Accordingly to the law, only the owner can sign and fill in the Section 8. So the previous owner's address and telephone number or name doesn't appear on that Section 8. And if you are not in possession of a Section 8 when you are transferring the cattle, you can get a 5,000 rand fine, or you can then maybe they can actually arrest you for imposition of stolen cattle. So be aware of that. Those two documents is really important. And I think at this stage, the SAPs are focusing on those documents. As Jane mentioned earlier, the stock theft is a big problem in the Free State. And we have to see in what way we can actually get these figures, because it's rising every time that we are at a SAPS meeting. The figures are just every time more and more. So we have to do something. And this act is since 1959. So if you're a farmer and you never filled it in correct, you're not above the law. So someone asked us the question once and said, what is the difference between a farmer that fill in a document and it's not correct, together with maybe a stock theft guy that's there? There's no difference. If you filled it in incorrectly, it's a false statement or that document is incorrect. What we try to also say at meetings is when you sign your testament for when you are not there anymore, you filled it incorrectly. You make sure that you sign the document, that all the people that have to sign that document, Section 8 and 6, make sure that you read it correctly and fill in that necessary info that are required there.
Thanks so much, Isobel. Gugu, I think we're both dumbfounded at this point. All the legislation and everything sounds like a lot, but it's vital.
Yes, Dr. Kekana?
If I can just come in and offer my 2 cents on livestock, there's actually ear tags that are laser printed with, you can print your phone numbers on there and you can print your names. I mean, it's not going to stop someone from stealing your animals, but I know back home when they steal animals, they don't load them directly at your gate. So they had them for a while before they load them. So if somebody knows your tag color or they can see your phone numbers, they can call you and alert you that, hey, somebody's busy loading your animals here. Where are you? It's not going to be a 100% prevention, but it will aid in prevention. So if anyone is interested in those ear tags, I think the cost for those, it comes up to around 5 rand to 10 rand per tag. If people are interested, they're welcome to DM me and I'll connect them with the sales agent that's responsible for that.
Dr. what you say is very important. In the past, it happens that we actually identify the owner if he only has that ear tags. And then he gets the cattle back, but maybe he can get a fine because it's not brand marked or tattooed. But that ear tag does help. And in the Stop Theft Act, there are actually places where you can stipulate that ear tag that you put in with the number and the name. So that's a different mark. And that is also important to give that to the SAPs when your cattle are stolen. So yes, we do work on that, and it's just another mark that they can find the cattle.
That's the sharing. Thank you so much, Isobel and Dr. Kekana, that, there are some things that we can do on our side to at least try and protect our livestock. So thank you so much for sharing that, and also offering to help us. I know Isobel said that if you guys would like to, understand the process of Section 8 and 6, she'll gladly help, which is very, very great. Thank you so much, Isobel. Herbal Medicine is here. Hi, Holistic. How are you?
Hello, guys. I'm just grateful to be a part of this discussion of talking of the future. So I just wanted to ask, let's say as like a mainstream farmer, I don't know if I'm in lack of the right word. Is it difficult or is it viable for us to start working with nature in terms of perhaps maybe harvesting water is what they do in like agroforestry? Is it viable, or will it work in like mainstream farming, whereby we really work with nature in terms of perhaps maybe water harvesting and mulching, make sure that our crops are mulched and stuff like that so that the sun cannot sort of damage them? Is it viable? I just wanted to ask if it's viable.
Absolutely holistic. And I think that's such a very important gen, right? Nature does destroy, but it also provides. So is there any way that we can mitigate that using mulching practices and water harvesting?
We have another question here. Be connected. You've requested also to engage. You can turn on your mic and ask the speakers any questions you'd like to. We also have 2 messages that came through via DM, so I'll also review that.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody on the platform and the host and the speakers. Interesting topic. It's just a question in relation to the bee industry, in relation to the stock theft that is. Unfortunately, the bees are not really recognized as stock or livestock. How would you guys advise to mitigate any losses of damages in relation to the stock theft of bees in that regard? And also, what involvement should CPAs play in protecting farmers in relation to livestock and or crop for that matter, or anybody that has an interest with the properties on the farmers' holdings? I hope my questions have made sense. I'm looking forward to hearing the answers.
Thanks so much, Be Connected. Isobel, Jane, do you have any specific responses? Dr. Kekana? Any takers for this question?
I think on that one, Jane would be the better one to answer that question, Jane.
The latter part of the question, I'm not sure about that, but let's just refer to the first part of the question. Bees are not 100% involved in bee theft because we haven't picked it really up in the Free State. But if I can say, every type of animal or maybe bees or whatever, I think there is really some information that there can be bee theft, especially when you steal the whole course of the bees. That is now when it comes to the reporting of any theft. It's difficult to really determine whether a specific type of animal is being targeted, where specific farms also in geographical areas are being targeted, if there's no reporting of that. That's why we are stressing it a lot amongst the farming communities, even the upcoming farmers, the subsistence farmers, commercial farmers, it doesn't matter. Where there is any type of criminal activity on your farm or your property, you need to report it to the SAPS. The record keeping of that is in statistics one of the most important things, because without any reactive reporting of any crime or theft, you cannot compile a decent crime pattern analysis. The crime pattern, the CPA, is actually guiding your proactive environment in order to curb any crime. So you need to have the reactive statistics and the reactive reporting of incidents in order to become proactive. So it's very much important that we understand, even if it's one sheep, even if it's one lamb, even if it's one calf that's being stolen. We have picked up a syndicate, I think, in the southern parts of the Free State, where they steal from 30 farms only one sheep, where they steal from 35 farms only one calf. So it's very much important to have that reporting figures, even if it's what type of animal or what type of locust or whatever it is, or like bees. I don't know if I've answered your second part that you referred to the crime pattern analysis, the CPAs. It's important to have communities also to become involved with the SAPS in doing crime prevention patrols. We call it the white and blue light patrols, whereby the farming communities are very much involved. Every month we have the figures. There's about 1,500 farmers that are participating on a monthly basis with the SAPS, about 200-300 of them, in trying to have high visibility in areas to combat any type of crime and especially livestock theft on the farms.
No, thank you very much. I do think you actually have covered the points, because it really does come down to community work and involvement and keeping the data alive to assist the police officers to keep on track. Because it is also quite problematic in our industry, the bee industry, because a lot of officers don't really, first of all, they're afraid of bees. They don't want to really investigate too much on it. But as you said, the paperwork should be right. And when communities come together, including with the structures of the CPA, then it will make things a whole lot easier in terms of collating the information and understanding how protected the CPA, or rather the community, is in that regard. So anybody here that's part of the CPA, I would also encourage you to follow Ms. Jane's advice in that regard, to keep in touch with your CPA and the community security platforms as well. No, thank you very much for the answers. I was thinking that as well. So it was good to bounce off some ideas as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Be connected, and Dr. Jane. This person is asking, it's Rapulane is asking, if he is allowed to use special characters at 1 month to mark his calves before he can brand them and then mark them again at 6 months. I'm not sure, Dr. Isobel, could you perhaps answer that one?
Okay, I'll answer on that. He asked for a special mark. Remember that the Stock Theft Act only said identification mark, and under the identification mark, the only mark is a tattoo that you marked in the ear, or then the brand mark where the cattle are marked. If you have a special mark and you do mark the sheep with that, and it's under a month and it's got stolen, then you've got that special mark. Then you're still under the law that says you don't have to mark your sheep until they 1 month old. Then you will get your sheep back in that instance, or even your calf, because you are still under the law that says you don't have to mark or brand mark the cattle under 6 mark. Above or over that, then you have to comply with what the animal identification mark requires from you. I hope that answers your question.
Rapulane is on the, maybe you can also just ask his question separately if he wants to, but thank you so much for that insight, Isobel. Maybe we can focus on protection of animals again. Dr. Kekana, there was a recent incident where a farmer lost, I think it was close to 400 ostriches due to a very heavy hailstorm in the Eastern Cape. You highlighted some of the ways farmers can specifically protect their livestock. Maybe you can refer to the specific incident and how farmers can protect their livestock if something like this happens.
Essentially, in a situation like that, it's a natural disaster. Farmers should regularly check their weather forecasts. I think that's one thing that I would recommend. So if you know what's coming, then you can plan for it. So if you know there's a hailstorm coming, maybe you can gift some form of a structure with zinc or fake brick walls or something, just to make sure that you're protecting them. But if the hailstorm is there and there's nothing you can do, I mean, you can't carry all of them into your house. I'm sure if that farmer would have at that point. But when it is okay, it's okay. There's no way out of it. There's a lot of livestock insurance companies. You know, your normal insurance offers insurance for your livestock. I'm not quite sure how it works or what the premiums would be. It's worth looking into and insuring your livestock just to sort of cushion the loss a bit. I mean, nothing will replace the life of the animal, but it would still, if you're in it for the production and for the profit, it will still cushion you a little bit from going bankrupt and losing everything else.
Dr. Isobel, please go ahead.
I just want to answer on that for the insurance of the cattle. As I understand, they only insured stud cattle and not the commercial cattle. Then it's really expensive if you want to insure the commercial cattle. That is really way up high, as I understand. But normally they do insure the stud cattle, if that helps.
Can we maybe more on that in terms of insurance? Because a lot of farmers claim that, insurance is not really understood in their field and they don't really get back, the livestock that has been stolen. So maybe if anyone has any knowledge on this in terms of how crop insurance or livestock insurance work, is it something that farmers can look into? Does it assist? I don't know if any of our speakers have any knowledge on that.
What I know is that King Price actually mentioned about a year ago, they are busy looking into the livestock insurance on animals. So I'm not 100% sure whether they're already there. Like Isobel mentioned, it's the stud farmers that can insure their cattle, but the commercial farmers not. I was at an interview where King Price mentioned that they are looking into that as one of the first insurance companies maybe to insure livestock.
The insurance, you have to make sure if you have a stud bull. Normally they would ask for hard water, red water, gull sickness and all those stuff. And then there is exclusions as well on that. I remember if the bull is skillpine lightning, that's not included. So make sure before you insure your cattle exactly what is included and what is excluded, even on the fertility of the bull.
Thank you so much for shedding light on that. And it really would be interesting and very supportive for insurance companies to cover us when it comes to crop damage and livestock theft, because it is something that is a reality for farmers. I hope we can get moving on changing that narrative. I see Andile's hand is up. Hi, Andile.
I wanted to just talk about crop insurance from Santam. So Santam actually offers crop insurance to a lot of farmers. And, if you are, especially in, like I said, a very rapid, fast, quick in, quick out type of enterprise when it comes to cash crops and agriculture, you always look at your cost benefit analysis and you figure out, do you really want to go into crop insurance, or can you actually get an extra number of seedlings that could actually be planted to add to the yield and the vigor of your enterprise? But Santam is one of the institutions that I know do offer crop insurance. So if you are in an area or in a position where you have a lot of issues with crop failure due to natural causes, perhaps that's one place you can actually go and look and check out their website.
Thanks so much, Andile. Isobel?
Yes, I just want to mention, if you insured the cattle, it is a stud pool. It's only for a year. I'm not sure it changed. I worked with it a few years ago, but it was about 80 or 90% of the amount that you bought the bull for. But it's only for a year, and then you have to reinsure that bull again. So it's only for 1 year. It's not for the whole lifetime.
Thanks so much for the insight. We have one speaker that has just joined. Francis, do you have a specific question for our speakers tonight?
This conversation is amazing, and this is what I've been looking for from you guys. I'm a young farmer. I started farming when I finished my campus 2019. So mostly I'm based at the community, and mostly I visit some local farmers and then see what their challenge they're facing. I had a question about crops. I had a question about sampling method that are used for estimation of damaged crops by wildlife, especially game species to agriculture, mainly crops. Actually, that's my question.
Thanks, Francis. Andile, do you have any experience with this? Is it something that you can advise or something that you can comment on?
But basically, we would have a random sampling method where you would obviously measure out a particular portion or section. So, for example, even if you don't use a frame, if you measure using a measuring wheel, for example, say 50 meters by 50 meters by 50 meters, and then actually going through the tedious task of having people disease spotting or spotting the number of plants within that measured area that have been damaged. And then you would obviously take the number of crops from that area, maybe some 4 or 5 particular areas within a particular plot or in a particular farm. And then you'd obviously work out, first of all, get an average of the number of plants that are damaged within that particular area that you've measured out. And then you would multiply that or look at that over the entire plot total that you have planted. And then obviously that representation will give you an idea of the number of crops that have failed within that particular crop. Definitely say, you're at 10%, which is basically that 10% is more of like an acceptable measure in anything really in agriculture in terms of loss or damage that's not recoverable. That's usually what the leeway that we sort of work on. So even when it comes to, for example, plants that we've planted, cabbages, for example, if you've planted 100 of them, you expect that at least 10 of them are not going to come out so great. And if obviously you have higher numbers, that's where you start to look at the issue that could potentially cause that to happen from a climatic perspective, from the soil health perspective, from a water, rainfall and irrigation perspective, as well as the actual cultivar based on the environment. That perhaps might highlight it a little bit better.
Thanks so much, Andile. Francis, is that fair enough for you? There is obviously an opportunity for you to connect with the speakers separately, if like more detail on the responses.
Thank you, Andile, for that elaboration. I was talking about crop protection and its effectiveness against wildlife, actually. But I want to say thank you for that elaboration, and I think I got something about it. Thank you very much.
I see that Holistic Fellow is back on as a speaker. Do you have another question for our panelists tonight and speakers tonight?
I just wanted to perhaps, I don't know, most of the guys here are commercial farmers. So I just wanted to ask, is it then possible, let's say for instance to Andile, I remember when the last time you mentioned something about like weeds and stuff. Isn't it like weeds, perhaps maybe it shows that there's something, it's a niche of something wants to grow there. Can we then use that to our advantage perhaps and put more stuff so that we don't have more of the weeds? How can we go about it? Is it, since weeds are like a niche, is it possible to work with them and put more things? For instance, like weeds in mulching, is it viable or is it, I don't know, I wanted just Andile to perhaps highlight on that one.
Okay, so I'm not too sure about weeds per se. I understand your question in the sense that sometimes because nature will do what it wants and, sometimes you can use nature as an indicator of various things that are either thriving within that particular environment or soil, things that are lacking, based on the types of weeds that grow, like broadleaves or grasses, etc. Like I say, it's very difficult to work with weeds simply because they are quite demanding on nutrients from the soil. And so we feel as though they take away from what the plant could be using in order for you to get a good yield or to get good vigor or to keep a certain quality of your crop. So weeds are high competition for your crops, not easy to work with. However, you are able to use various methods of mulching that are not conventional, not the conventional plastic mulch or the conventional use of hay. But for example, in some instances, we have found that if you're planting maize, for example, you're able to also plant some seeds or distribute seeds for things like couch grass and oats in between, because when they grow, they will cover up and suppress the growth of other weeds, but they are also useful both for soil, for nitrogen in the soil, for example. Some of the legumes that you can plant are good for fixation of nitrogen within the soil, that's one. And then two, they can also be used to be plugged back into the soil, or even better, can be used for grazing livestock. If you have any livestock on the farm, they can be cut and baled. So you have options of using other methods of planting various things in between rows of certain crops in order for you to be able to gain two advantages. One, which is obviously vigor in terms of your growth and input in the soil, as well as for use in terms of feeding livestock as well as.
Thanks so much, Andile. Peter, you wanted to also contribute to tonight's discussion. Do you have a question or comment for our speakers?
Good evening. Thanks so much once again. As a farmer, as a wine producer, and someone who's also involved with livestock, I'd just like to give on some personal advice that works for us as a farming community, and hopefully that could inspire some fellow farmers. Livestock theft is a threat. It's one of the biggest challenges within a farming community, no matter where you are. If in Cape Town, if you are in Gauteng, Limpopo, or Northwest, livestock theft happens all the time. But I truly believe that prevention is better than curing the problem. So we need to look at this holistically and look at how can we prevent livestock theft. I think one of the biggest things is ensuring that your infrastructure is right. So ensuring that you've got correct fencing around everywhere. And obviously there are lots of upcoming farmers that does not have the budget necessarily to have huge security systems in place. But another thing is to have visible policing, not talking SAPs. And I'm not necessarily talking about having a security company in place. What I talk about here is to make sure for us, we drive along our fences each and every day to look for holes. We look for any suspicious tracks that's been made close to our border of our farm. So people know we are continuously on the lookout for these types of things. Another thing that we've got, and this is quite an interesting maneuver, is we've got what we call a sheep alarm. So it's basically a bracelet that you put around the sheep's neck. And this bracelet is made to actually censor when the sheep is in distress. What happens if the sheep are being chased in the middle of the night? We get a phone call from the sheep. It literally says blue sheep, for example. Then you know it's the sheep in this camp. And it gives you a GPS location of exactly where this sheep is, where this herd is, and how fast they are jogging or what's happening. And then you immediately know to go out. So to be proactive is the one thing. Another thing is for communities to stand together. And we have spoken about this in the past as well. Like I said, not everyone can afford a big security company to look after your animals. But what you can do to be a bit of a community farming security forum, almost like a community watch. If you guys are 5 farmers working together, you have shifts that at least once a night someone is driving around up and down the roads, being proactive. There are WhatsApp groups alerting people of suspicious behaviors. And then also the criminal activity will go down because the criminals know that you are on high alert and that you are being proactive. What happens is sometimes people are very reluctant and they don't care about their security and they only get angry when things happen. But when you go ask them, what have you done to prevent the crime? Then they throw their hands up in the air and then they don't have answers. Once again, prioritize security on your farm. Be proactive with visible policing. Use what you've got and use that to the best of its abilities.
Thanks so much, Peter. Always great insight from him, Gugu. You know this. Whenever he's on Farm Spaces, he's on Gather to Grow tonight. And I'm really excited to have him here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Peter. You're always welcome, on these spaces with so much great insight, right? I just have maybe one last question, Dawn, for the speakers. I know we spoke about crop damage, things that are beyond our control, but what about things that are not beyond our control, something that we can control, like putting a fence, strategies to protect crops from wild animals, natural repellents? Maybe we can touch more on that, of things that we can actually control that actually work. Maybe we can start with crops and then we'll move on to livestock. Dr. Kekana, your thoughts on livestock with things that we can control?
There's a few things that farmers can do. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to sort of know what's happening with the climate and the weather patterns over the next couple of weeks or months. And then just to protect from predators and all that sort of thing, I know a lot of the sheep farmers keep donkeys and llamas. I think we've all seen that video of a donkey biting the ear of a hyena or something, or a wild dog. Donkeys are very protective over their stock. The normal herding dogs, your Anatolians and those other stuff, it also goes a long way in protecting from predators. And again, just make sure you have a structure that's good enough that you would also feel comfortable leaving your stuff in there and making sure that they will be protected from some of the weather effects.
So we can move on to Andile. So Google was asking, what can we do that's in our control to protect our crops from crop damage and also protect our livestock? Any last advice that you can give farmers as we wrap up Gather to Grow tonight?
For some of us, especially if you are a young farmer, entrant farmer, emerging farmer, or someone who is also still trying to build themselves in the industry, you find that answering these questions is often difficult because they usually come at a time when you're right at the point where you are either putting your own advice into practice or you need ways to try and figure out how best to work around the issues that you're currently facing. For example, just like the issue with hail not so long ago, seemed like a bright idea to then start approaching people who own piggeries to try and distribute some of the damaged crop that was still fresh but just unappealing because the quality had decreased. That is not any good nutritional value to pigs or any livestock for that matter to actually try and feed these very apparently rich crops too. So, and they rely often on their balancing of their own feed. So it's not easy to just infiltrate in a standing enterprise because you're in a crisis. So the best way to go about it, firstly, is to obviously try and, as someone had mentioned before, to just be aware of the climatic conditions of the area. Yeah, we are facing a difficult or challenging time where climate change is so real that we are experiencing temperatures that are dropping later into the season and into summer, and sometimes we're experiencing irregular hail patterns. One would be to also then identify a possibility of being able to get in touch with the food processors and just having that conversation on standby with someone to be able to get the assistance of being able to push through any crops that may have been damaged. And then lastly, I think it's to look at your growing season. It does sound a little bit risky, but nonetheless, it is good to also look at planting your early maturing crop varieties. Try your best to look at the various varieties and their ability to, we always have this argument, there's a big difference between crops and varieties that are tolerant and resistant. So we often always look for something that is resistant, but there's really no such thing as a crop that is resistant. But there are crops that can tolerate certain climatic conditions. Always adhere to those. And then where possible, really start doing your research around crop insurance and see perhaps it could actually be viable just to protect your crop for the summer season more specifically and the high hail season.
Thank you so much, Andile. I want to move on to Isobel. As a chairperson of the Stock Theft Forum, what do you guys use in terms of things that you guys can control? I know that you guys obviously have your own community initiatives and, patrols. Do you guys have any decoys? Do you guys have support from even government when it comes to stock theft?
I'll answer that question in this way, that we ask the farmers to make sure that all your documentation is in order. That's the one thing. Make sure all your cattle are marked. We also have a pocketbook because you have to count your cattle, and we advise, see if I can count them every day or just have a look at the cattle. Then I just saw a case yesterday coming in that the cattle last 2 weeks, he wasn't with his cattle. So where are we going to look for those cattle? The other thing, some of them were talking about the time. When it's full moon, then we actually know it's full moon. The guys are stealing more cattle because they can actually see them. So that's a time that you have to look for that. We have documentation if you have to fill in if you have stock theft case. That was compiled with Dr. Jane Bays and with the advocate from the police, how to fill in that document and hand it into the SAPs. They have to take that it's correctly filled in and all the necessary info is there. Make sure that if you do have a stock theft case, that you actually don't disturb the area. So when the police dogs came in or the forensic department, that they can actually then gather all the information that is necessary or DNA that they can find on the scene to use. What we also do is if you have a case and there's a problem with that or it wasn't handled correct with SAPs, me and Dr. Jane, we are working together to see where we can handle that and see if they can maybe look into that case, or sometimes it's scratch from the roll. Then we actually look into that, and if we have enough evidence, then it's going to be back on the roll. What we also do is if there is cases and we are not satisfied with the ruling of the court in the sentence, we actually appeal against that. So if there is grounds that we can work on that, we actually do that. But to sum this all up, we actually tell them to make sure your cattle is brand marked. Make sure, as Jane said in the beginning, make sure that the guy that you are hired with the cattle, that you actually looked into his past. That you know, because most of the time when we are visiting people and we are gathering all this info and we have a statistic list gathered together with Jane, we find it's the same guys, the same cell phone numbers, the car registration numbers, so that throughout the Free State. It's the same guys in different areas. But make sure that when you give information, that they look into that as well, to follow that up. And if you don't have satisfaction in the Free State, we can actually look into that and help you. But make sure that your area is protected and that your fences, that's the one thing. Like that one farmer said, they look into that every day. If your fence is, if there's cut, then you know there's something going to happen.
Thank you so much, Isobel. Great advice and much needed advice for any farmer farming in the country. Dr. Jane Buys, your last comments before we close off Gather to Grow tonight?
I just need to say I usually have a word you can spell, R-I-C-K-I. It's Ricky. And that word means everything. It's 5 things that's not going to cost you any money at all. The first one is the R, it's relationships. Ensure that you have good relationships with your neighbors, with the SAPs. Every police station needs to have a rural safety coordinator in terms of the rural safety strategy. In our structure, like organized agriculture and the RPO, we've got safety representatives. So every farmers association has a safety representative, and there are 148 of them in the Free State. So there should be a structure involved somewhere that you can actually, either at the CPF of the SAPs or the rural safety coordinator of the SAPs, or whatever you have, maybe a FASA structures or whatever NAFU, then you need to divert that information to that person. In particular, if you have a problem in terms of a crime incident on your farm or affecting your property. The I stands for you need to really look at the information. Whether there's suspicious persons involved, suspicious activity, suspicious movement, any person that is actually not where they're supposed to be. So suspicious movement is actually for us a big pre-runner to serious things that is coming up. If we talk about farm attacks, it's usually there are specific crimes that you need to focus on in order to prevent maybe a possible farm attack. So information is crucial, information. Then the C is communication. Ensure that you have proper communication channels, even on WhatsApp safety groups, even on Telegram or on whatever forums. Communicate with the necessary people. If you maybe some farmers have radio networks, etc., where you can play information and get assistance. K stands for knowledge. Enable yourself with knowledge to the best of your ability to run your business, your agricultural business, your enterprise to the best of your knowledge and ability. There's the RPO and the organized agriculture and groups involved that can assist you. And the last thing is that get involved. Get involved in your communities, get involved in specific structures, in CPFs and neighborhood watches. Also do your part as the community and as a business owner and as an agricultural business enterprise, ensuring that the overall community is more safe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jane Buys. Valuable insight. Gugu, we've had lots to talk about tonight, and we've actually gone crazy over time, but it was much needed, and I think the information is so valuable to farmers. If you're a commercial farmer, if you're a new farmer, if you're just starting out in the industry, this is need-to-know information.
I agree with you so much. It's been so valuable. And I think very important, as farmers, we are isolated, so safety should be top priority. And I'd just like to thank the speakers for sharing their insights on how we can really mitigate a lot of things. Really appreciated tonight's session. So thank you so much, Dawn.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank our speakers once again, Dr. Kekana, Andile, Isobel, Dr. Jane. Thank you so much, Ningas, and everyone else who engaged on tonight's Gather to Grow. So thank you once again for joining Food from Zanzi's Gather to Grow. Thank you to our awesome host, Guguletu, and all of our speakers once again. Next time, we will look forward to welcoming you back, and have a lovely evening further.